Guys, I am so glad that you're joining us again for another series in our Connect resources, where we're going to be talking about Ruth chapter 3, but mainly focusing in on mission and compassion in our series. I'm joined again by the fantastic Alistair Wallace, who is our Antrim site pastor, and Charlotte Curran, who is our East site pastor. Guys, thank you for coming.
Charlotte, not fantastic too, is it?
No, I'm distinctly average, Charlotte Curran.
That,
it's fine, Ryan, it's fine. I can take
I look
it.
after you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Alistair.
He's just stirring the pot in the middle here. He's loving it. Absolutely loving it. Okay, I'm excited actually what we're going to get into. I think this is a really unique passage in chapter 3 that we're going to get into today. And we're going to talk a little bit about power today, or power. For anybody that lives in North Down, we have to say it the appropriate way. Power or power. Just to introduce that concept, I actually didn't kind of mention this to you guys before or anything, but you know, when we talk about power in this day and age, we love power. We actually talked about it in our Broken Signposts series. Power is one of those aspects where we learn so much of God and who He is and His characteristics. But power can be tainted a little bit. Anything you guys could say to power in this day and age? You know, we're power hungry. Give me a little bit of culture, the culture around power right now. How do you see it playing out?
I think that, again, it comes down to like a lack of understanding about the purpose of power. It's not that we're all meant to carry it. Every human's meant to carry it.
Right.
And I think we get into difficulty when we misunderstand why we carry our power. Our purpose of our power is to participate in the story of making all things new.
Right.
You know, and I think sometimes instead what we want to do is create a kingdom for ourselves where we're at the top of the pile, which inevitably means that other people are beneath us. In order for you to be at the top, someone else has to be at the bottom.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've got into trouble. So we take other people's power to supplement our own instead of just running in the authority we've been given for the purpose we've been given it.
That is so
difficult.
true. You know that there is that verse that says you've been given the right to become children of God. The actual translation can be you've been given the power to become children of God. And I think you're so right. When we try and obtain power, as opposed to recognizing the power that we have been inherited and been given, we can wreck people. Anything you would add to that?
No, we were discussing a wee bit earlier just about even how we use power, authority, or influence in our lives, and it's, you know, you can either use it to empower other people. Probably the right way to use it is to, you know, to help them fulfill all they have to do. Or do we abuse power, where, you know, we manipulate people and control them? Or Charlotte was saying about even how sometimes we abdicate responsibilities and power and hand that over to somebody else. And I think that comes up later on in the story as well.
Yeah,
so there's different ways of looking how we actually deal with it.
Yeah, I think it's a really healthy conversation to have, especially around mission and compassion. Right? I think we need to get into this, and so hopefully you guys have had the chance to read through Ruth chapter 3. Alistair, Charlotte, you guys are going to unpack this a little bit. Context really important here. Okay, it can be quite a delicate passage to move through. Can you just start to introduce us to it a little bit? What's going on here, and give us some context?
Well, I think we've probably already discussed some of the ideas around levirate marriage. Even that whole concept's very alien to the 21st century. You know, boy meets girl, falls in love, and it wasn't always like that. You know, in the biblical times, marriages were arranged, and people accepted that. And there's provision. I think even inheritance rights were huge. And I think we see some of that coming into play here. Of, you know, how will the land pass on? Right. And so to redeem Elimelech's line, is Ruth has to go to Boaz, and almost ask him, "Will you be my husband?" Right. And she's quite entitled to do that under the law. But we'll see in here that there was somebody else in a better position than Boaz to that, and how he deals with that whole situation. But it's probably hard for us for the 21st century looking into this, thinking what on earth is going on.
Absolutely.
And as we say, even how Naomi tells her to dress and stuff, it's I suppose what we would say, you know, a lot of Old Testament stuff, especially around the period of Judges, you say it's descriptive, it's not prescriptive.
It's so important.
It's describing a cultural moment, but it's not saying this is how we ought to behave in the 21st century, because some of the advice you give us, you may not give that to the ladies going out. So I would look at it from that point of view as well.
Yeah. Anything you would add to that? That language is really key. What you said there. It's not prescriptive.
Yeah,
it's descriptive.
Yeah.
Anything you would add to that?
And that's one of the things I actually really, really love about scripture is sometimes you read it and you're like I wouldn't have told that part of the story.
Yeah.
But it's a whole story
Yes.
as it happened.
Yeah. You would have left that part out.
Yeah. It's like, can we just tell the shiny bits?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think that's the encouraging thing. I mean, God has left this stuff in Scripture. You know, it's the warts and all, because we see the warts and all in all of us.
Yeah.
As we look through this and go, oh my goodness, and we're shocked, and we're meant to be shocked when we read some things in Scripture. But this is one of those curious ones of, oh my goodness, did that really happen?
I think then when we see it, Ruth is offering herself. Am I right in saying Ruth is offering herself in marriage? Right, that would be.
I think we could draw that conclusion. I think that wouldn't be a wrong
Many commentators
conclusion.
do.
Yeah.
Right. So Ruth is offering herself in marriage. She is presenting herself. It puts her in quite a vulnerable position, being a Moabite woman. You know, with being an outsider potentially. She's offering herself to Boaz, which then puts him in a position of power.
Yeah.
This is why we're talking about power. Can you draw that out a little bit for us, Alistair?
Well, it's just taking just a wee step back, maybe. You know, she's a Moabite woman, and Moabite women, unfortunately, had a bit of a reputation.
Right.
And but Boaz says when he realizes she's there, he says something very beautiful to her. He says, all the people of my town know that you're a woman of noble character, and even that point, it's just that this woman who comes from a place of bad reputation, he sees her for her true value, and just the character shine through. She's the only woman in Scripture actually defined as a woman of noble character. She fulfills that, Proverbs 31 beautifully. But she has it, and he sees that in her. But I suppose the power comes as, what does he do next?
Right.
He's a man. It's a very vulnerable position. He's had the feast, they've had a few glasses of wine, and defences are down. What's going to happen next? And maybe do you want to maybe comment from that point of view, Charlotte?
Well, even before you get into that, you talk about Ruth's activity in the story, about being the noble character that she's displayed, which is really important, isn't it? Like that, how she's held herself and carried herself despite reputation and despite
the innuendo and stuff going on behind you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the way we carry ourselves in any given moment, we don't realise how important every moment is. So I think there is a tendency in society to duplicity. So when the spotlight's on, we present our best version. And the kingdom's not supposed to be that way. So what we see here is a spotlight put on something that happens behind the curtain.
Right.
So nobody else would have known about this part of the story. Do you know, this is not something that happened publicly. This is God through His Scripture spotlighting something that happens behind the scenes.
Right.
Because behind the scenes is where it really happens.
Right.
That's where the stuff of life really happens. And I think both characters here play into that, because what we see is Boaz's interaction with Ruth here is based on things that have happened in normal, average, everyday life. And her so far, she has been displaying noble character all throughout the story.
Right.
And now in this crunch moment, that plays in.
Right.
All of that stuff, all of that day-to-day, regular, behind-the-scenes, no highlight reel stuff plays into how this moment goes. And I think that's the way the kingdom functions, you know. And in our own lives, you know, I'm sure there are times where we've seen how, like, I always find it really fascinating when the Lord has opened a door for me historically in my life. What has happened prior to that every single time is that there has been a moment where I've had to do something I didn't want to do, and I've had to give a yes I didn't want to give in a secret place. I've had to surrender, and I didn't realize at the time I was just having to surrender, and it was hard and difficult. But those behind the scenes moments give way to a moment that, you know, that maybe brings you into a different space or opens another door.
Yeah.
You know, that's the stuff of life.
Yeah.
And I think she's shown her noble character.
Yeah.
So the crunch here is Boaz going to show the same character, because he's now in a position of power.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he's the boss, he's the rich landowner, and he has a decision to make regarding Ruth, and how's he going to treat her. So I think that's crucial at this point, you know, and all the character, you know, we were talking about in Ruth up to this point, you know, how's the character in Boaz been built up to this point, and how's he going to react, and say, nobody's going to know.
And so take us there, Alistair. How does, because what Charlotte is saying is that is so profound. It's so anti-culture of, we live in the day and age of the highlight reel. It's all about the image you can portray externally. Yeah. Yet we're looking at a moment behind closed doors. We're seeing glimpses of Ruth, the way she lived every day. But now the doors close, and Boaz is in a position of power. Yeah. Where he could very easily take advantage. He could use it for his own game, whatever that looks like. So can you kind of take us into that?
I think it's Charlotte said about the spotlight. This is out of the spotlight. So what's his character going to be shown to be? Is he going to treat her nobly? Is he going to look after her? And I think we see this unfolding through it, where he doesn't take advantage of her. And if anything, when he sends her away eventually, he's making sure that nobody else can say a bad word about her.
Right.
He's taking responsibility in the situation to protect her dignity.
So it's almost that above and beyond again.
Yeah, she's had a good name up to this point, but she could walk away from this with a really bad name if people were to see things happening. So I think he has treated her fantastically well. Right. But I think I think even taking out of that, it's in terms of the power in our everyday situations, I think it's crucial as well. Yeah. One, as Charlotte saying, what are we like behind closed doors when nobody else is watching? But also when we're given opportunities, do we protect people's dignity? Do we look after it, or do we exploit it?
Yeah,
and that's a massive challenge. And going back to what was said last week about Boaz, he challenges a lot of the preconceived ideas, even of men in leadership. Especially thinking in church. I think of Scott McKnight's recent book with his daughter Laura. A church called Tov, and things that have happened in churches because men in the moment haven't sort of taken responsibility and acted with character.
So do you think there's a lesson for men?
I think it's huge. It's a massive challenge for men, how we treat women. I think it's huge. And not just in church life, but any level of life where we have authority. Are we going to use it to empower women to be who God's called them to be, or are we going to take advantage?
Right.
Or are we going to abdicate our responsibility towards them, which is another aspect we talked about earlier as well.
Yeah.
But let's just leave that to somebody else, not my issue.
Yeah.
Whereas Boaz makes a stand here.
I'm glad you say that. So we have this. What we can take and learn from this practically is looking at the power that we have and how we use it. You're drawing out mainly for men to say, literally, you've got a man who could take advantage of a woman here. How are we empowering and living that out? You mentioned the abuse of power, and Charlotte, you talk a little bit about the abdication of power. Can we go there a little bit, right? Yeah. So there's two different aspects of how we steward our power, right? Boaz here is in a position of power, and you're saying he goes above and beyond, right, to protect and to help. So how do we steward our power? And then you talk about abdication of power. Draw that out a little bit for us.
I think that we all have a level of influence and authority. So it's not just about position or having a position of leadership. I think of myself even in my home. When I moved from being a child to being a mother, there was a level of power that I had. The power dynamic is in my favour in my home because I'm the adult. So even in a conversation with the child, whether it's your child or not, there's a power dynamic there just by the fact that you're taller. So all of us have these different positions of power. And I think the two temptations that where power can go wrong for all of us is abusive power, like what we're talking about, the potential Boaz here has to abuse power to get what he wants or to meet his own needs, regardless of what anybody else wants or needs. And the other temptation, which is just as problematic in society, is the abdication of authority and power. Right. So what he says here is, Boaz says, he's clearly willing to step into the story, but he says there's a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. And, you'll maybe talk about that in the next episode, because that kinsman redeemer, the other person who's closer, who has the opportunity to step into Ruth's story, will reject that opportunity. He will abdicate the space. And there's so many temptations to abdicate the authority we've been given. We think about that in big, massive issues like parents who leave the home and abdicate parental responsibility and leave a child trying to figure out how to do life without a mother or a father. But even it's not even as obvious as that. I think sometimes, for me personally, the biggest temptation for me is abdication of power. That's the one. I think we find ourselves in patterns, and my pattern is to abdicate power. And what that is down to is fear. For me, I struggle with fear of stepping into the spaces that God's given me. And so it's easier for me to let somebody else, like to do nothing and let somebody else take the space. But I have a responsibility to the space that God's given. We all do. If God's given us that space, we're held accountable for the space that we occupy as, siblings, parents, children, in our workplaces, where we all have these spaces and we're held accountable to that space. And so it's very easy to just let go and say, oh, I can't, to shrink. But that's just as bad. It's just as bad because we're not stewarding the position we've been given well. And actually, there are times I was thinking when I was reading this earlier, I was thinking about in the Old Testament where God says, I'm going to shepherd my people, because the shepherds who were physically near, they didn't do the job. A lot of time it was abusive power in that situation, but they didn't do the job. So even though they were near and it was their responsibility, they didn't take that responsibility seriously. And I think I felt so convicted this morning as I was thinking about it. I was like, where are the spaces where other people, God's having to make other people step into the space because I'm the nearest, but I'm not doing the job. So God's having to supplement because I'm not taking my position seriously, whether that's with my neighbour. My neighbour, I'm the nearest house. So where's God having to supply their need through someone else because the person who's nearest, who's the next in line, isn't doing it? It's like so convicting.
You two just need to leave.
Scripture's so convicting. We shouldn't read it. No, we shouldn't.
Even the text, like Boaz is sort of going, there is somebody else can do this. But if he doesn't, I will. And whereas I think I put my own default position, that's somebody else's responsibility.
It's not my responsibility. That's good.
When somebody else, I might do it, but he takes an initiative here. And so it's again, it's a shining example of, even if this guy doesn't, I will. And to have that mentality, it goes against their grain.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as well we get overwhelmed. We can be generous often. We have the position to do it, but what difference can I actually make if I help that one person that I'm walking past in the street, or if I do something in one moment? What impact can I really have? I think is another barrier, isn't it? Of like, you abuse power, abdicate power. Maybe that is a level of abdication of like, I can't really do much anyway, so I don't need to be aware of the needs around me. My next door neighbour, they'll be all right. God will take care of them, and we never actually fill that space. I think that's so true.
We were talking about this recently in church. I was telling the story of neighbours of ours when we were growing up. So when we were growing up, we didn't have very much, it was hand to mouth oftentimes in our family. And my mum, whenever she gave her life to Jesus, would often pray in the food for us on any given day. And I was telling the story just recently about this one time where my mum was praying in the food for the day, and she had enough to feed us for breakfast and lunch, but didn't have enough to feed us for dinner. But she was praying, so she set the table, and still no dinner. She set us down to eat, still no dinner. My eldest brother, I was quite young, so I don't remember, but my eldest brother said he thought she'd gone mad when she started to say grace, because he knew there was no food. And she said grace for the food, and as she finished saying grace, doorbell rang, and the neighbour across the street said, I've made too much and I wondered, could your family use some food? And it is amazing, but the point that I was making when I told the story was that was nothing to her. It was just a little extra, but it was everything to us. And so your nothing that you have, the little bit you have, is somebody else's everything. Brilliant. And if we're not willing to give it, we're denying the everything somebody else needs. And that wasn't actually a physical neighbour, in that story.
And you could say for Boaz, if he had just neglected Ruth or just, it wouldn't have changed his life too much, would it? I mean, he could have kept, he was a happy...
Well, he's a rich man, and he's a big pile of grain, so it's not going to cost him a lot, but it's made a massive difference to Naomi and Ruth.
And to the whole story, because the lineage of Jesus plays into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Where I kind of want to land today. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, it's in those wee moments that history's made. So he could have done something different, and history would have changed, and God probably would have used somebody else. A bit like the Esther story, God could raise somebody else up, but he doesn't. And it's in those sort of key moments that destinies sort of turn. But going back to what Charlotte said, the key moment turns on a character that's built up over years.
Yeah.
But in that one moment of testing, the destinies change for everybody, for us included. So it's a fantastic story.
But that excites me. Like, come on, church.
It's
Like,
superb.
let's see the influence we can, as we live out the Hesed of God. Think of the impact. For me, I remember I accepted Jesus because I was like, whoa, my life now has purpose. Like that is the whole reason I decided to follow Jesus, is because I was like, oh my goodness, I have a contribution.
Yeah.
I have something to give here. That is brilliant. I'm so glad you
I
said
think a
that.
small thing. I mentioned last week about Hugh Nailing. I remember I was with them one time. They introduced me to two women in Vietnam who'd been Vietnamese boat people. And at the age of about 12, they were both sent in this boat and ended up on an island in Hong Kong. And they said the only people that showed them kindness were Christians that came along once a week, give them some food. And for those Christians, it probably didn't mean very much. But because somebody showed them this hesed, both of them, became Christians eventually, going back. And they're probably two of the biggest evangelists I've ever met in my life. But it all comes down to some Christian turned up once a week and gave a simple act of kindness. And like the impact that's made in a nation and cities is unbelievable. So it's gone back to, if that lady next door hadn't fed you, dear knows what would have happened. But you've seen something of grace, in that situation,
That is
God's
brilliant.
provision.
Yeah.
But that's shaped your character. And so we say all these things, in retrospect, it all's fantastic, but you don't see it at the time.
Yeah.
No.
But it says those wee decisions, or seemingly small decisions, have big consequences.
And that's gold. Like the practicalities of this as we live this out in Mission and Compassion, where we want to finish today, and we'll draw this in for chapter 3, is we keep saying, how are we being formed into the Hesed of God? And one of the things I said to you guys before was how does Boaz do this? And you said something I think is really important that I want to capture here. How does Boaz make the decision that he makes? How do we be the Hesed or become the Hesed? Can you just touch on that again a little bit?
I just think when it comes to the crunch and the pressure is on, who we really are comes to the surface. It can't be hidden. And this is a moment where Boaz's guard is down. They've had a feast. There may have been some alcohol. His guard is down. He can't be somebody he isn't.
Yeah.
He's not being watched, so there is no motivation to be someone he isn't.
Yeah.
So who he truly is comes to the surface. And that is a man who has been formed right the way through. And then when it comes to the crunch, that man comes to the surface, and the whole story pivots on that. And so while it pivots on a moment, it doesn't. It pivots on a million moments up to that point, and a million decisions he's made to act with integrity and to be a man of honor. And that's the man that comes to the fore when the pressure's on. When the pressure's on, who we are, you can't hide it. It comes out. So developing who we are as people. Hesed is not something we do, it's someone we become.
Yeah, so that is it. That is so true. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? So let us become Hesed, this series. Thank you guys so much. I love that. And I hope that is helpful for you guys in your conversations as we are wrestling with this idea of mission and compassion. Don't forget to check out thisiscfc.com/compassion and mission, just to see how you can get involved locally and globally. But also, I think one of the takeaways from today is just how we're doing it in our everyday life with the power that God gives you. So bless you guys, and we will see you soon.